non zesfenu meden olo sulupu prosoli honestitosen totelos ochronos.
So we're going to shift gears now to explore not the sources of the world as it is today, but the nature of the world as it is today. In this discussion, we're going to spend time especially on those Olympian gods who actually structure, according to the Hesiotic worldview as interpreted by the philosophers, our day-to-day experience and the natural processes that govern ordinary human life. The different sort of areas of specialty or capacity that they represent. We'll also briefly sketch some of their interpretations by later philosophers and how they were received. So, at some point, we're just going to have to get down to brass tacks and deal with this kind of basic story of 12, traditionally, even though the number varies around the neighborhood of 12, gods, or theoi, who are the Olympians. That is, the gods associated especially with Mount Olympus, both as an actual mountain in Greece and as a kind of symbol of those high points of the earth we saw at the beginning of Hesiod's creation story, the point where earth touches heaven. Zeus. Zeus is a god who, and we're just talking here about the philosophical interpretation of the myths. There's lots of other theories and perspectives we can take, as we talked about earlier. On this view, Zeus in a way embodies the union of wisdom and justice. This isn't always an easy view to sustain, looking at the stories about Zeus that are popular in the poets following Hesiod's time, but in terms of the philosophical exegesis and ways that we'll talk about, Zeus represents the way that insight or understanding can be unified with fairness or justice. Hera, who is both Zeus's sister and Zeus's wife, represents the powers of rule or governance, as well as royalty and the family. Poseidon, Zeus's brother, is associated with the ocean, as Zeus is associated with the sky, also with the depths of the ocean, the monsters you can find there, and the life-giving powers of the waters, including the waters of deep mountain springs. Hades, another brother of Zeus and Poseidon, is allotted the underworld, as Poseidon holds the ocean and Zeus the sky. He is the unseen god in some ways. He's sometimes not listed in this group of 12. Sometimes he is. His euphemistic name Pluto alludes to wealth, the wealth that comes up from the earth, and he is the god who rules over the realm of the dead. Demeter is the goddess of the land, the crops, fertility, the cycle of food that sustains us, and in a way the human cultivation of nature. Athena is the goddess of skill in battle as well as wisdom and craft. Ares also is a god of battle and war, but quite differently. He's the god of passion, fury in war. But he's also a wonderful dancer, we're told. Aphrodite, of course, is the goddess of love and attraction, sexuality, desire, and beauty. She's sometimes represented as a lover of Ares. Hephaestus is the god of craftsmanship, of technology, of creativity, and is also sometimes represented as the husband of Aphrodite. Apollo is the god of the sun, of light, of music, of cultural memory. Sometimes he leads the muses in their dance, and he is the father of the first doctor, so he's associated with medicine. Artemis, his twin sister, is a goddess of the hunt, of the wilds, of the forest. Interesting to contrast with Demeter, who is the goddess of cultivated nature. Artemis is the goddess of wild nature. Now, Apollo and Artemis also have an important affinity. They are respectively guardians of young boys and young girls, and their coming of age. Dionysus is the god of the party, of ecstasy, of wine, of self-transcendence in a sense. And of course there's Hermes, the god of interpretation, messages, heralds, also of merchants, money, and language, sometimes of travel. Also, though we're already past the list of 12, a central figure, the eldest of the goddesses born of Kronos and Rhea, is important to stress, sometimes represented as the hearth and center of the Olympian order, because that's actually what she is. Hestia. Her name means the hearth, and she is at the center of the Olympian story, even though few myths and stories are told of her. In a way, even as the gods rotate, she represents the central fire, hearth, or life that doesn't change. And in this sense, too, she's associated with early philosophical cosmologies where a central fire is at the center of the universe rather than the sun or the earth being at the center of the universe. There's a few other important Olympian figures who are not included in that list so far that we should add. Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, and Hecate, we mentioned before, the powerful Titan and goddess of magic, and the crossroads. Here's another perspective on the Olympians. This is actually a Hellenistic relief from the 1st century BC, or the 1st century CE, so a couple of hundred years around the early Roman Empire, that represents a list of the Olympians, though again, sometimes you get different gods coming in and out of the particular group of 12. In this list, the story begins with Hestia, the eldest of her generation, who's represented here with a scepter and symbolizes hearth and home. Hermes, represented with his winged cap, represents travel, communication, language, interpretation. Aphrodite, love and attraction. Ares, war, struggle, passion, and the dance. Shifting over a little, we come next to Demeter, who again represents domesticated nature in a sense, agriculture, but also the power of life and its significance to humanity. Hephaestus, who with his staff represents crafts and creativity. Hera, whose scepter again represents both power, including royal power, and the family. Poseidon, with his famous trident representing the sea, the fertility of water, and deep emotion. A little bit further over we come to Athena, represented by her signature owl and her helmet, and she represents again wisdom as well as craft and battle. She's never defeated. Zeus, bearing his thunderbolt, representing the domain of the sky as well as wisdom and justice. Artemis with the bow, representing the coming of age for girls as well as hunting, and she is the goddess of the moon, as her twin brother Apollo, here represented with his lyre of music, represents the sun as well as music, memory, prophecy. He is the god, after all, whose oracle prophesies at Delphi, the Pythia, and the god of medicine. So one question we can ask again is, how do we find the logos in the mythos, the sense in the story? Do these ways of representing experience help to understand nature, psychology, and metaphysics? The Greek philosophers thought so. So for them, not only was it the case that some of the gods could be represented as natural processes, we mentioned before, for example, Zeus as fire, Hera as air, Aphrodite as attraction, Ares as repulsion, but also psychologically, that sort of energy of desire and repulsion is also something we know in our human psyche as basic motives and in the deep structure of the universe. So we can also think about whether this way of understanding the many dimensions of human experience resonates with us. Here's one particularly important aspect of asking that question, I think. In the Greek model, all of these are equally seen as fundamental or divine. It's true that Zeus is particularly important among the gods and very powerful, but all the gods are gods. There's nothing to say that it's better to worship or relate to or recognize in oneself the activity of Demeter as distinct from Hermes. And it's entirely illicit in this system to suppose that some people are drawn more in one direction and some people in another in their own efforts toward authenticity. In fact, some of the ancient Platonist philosophers relate these ideas explicitly, suggesting that relationship with the totality as well as particular gods and their spheres of influence is important in the human quest for authenticity, to be oneself and so to find meaning in one's life. So one way of looking at this is as a kind of representation of many different human motivations without any of them being strictly privileged over another. Sometimes we might feel thoughtful, crafty, wise in Athena's realm. Sometimes we might feel insightful, full of music, culture, and light like Apollo. Sometimes we might feel very homey like Hestia. Sometimes we might feel like the archetypal traveler like Hermes. And it's all good. One of the ways this idea has been received, in addition to that kind of slightly self-helpy psychological perspective maybe, is this. The names that are often conventionally given to different bodies in the solar system. Helios, of course, or Sol in Latin for the sun, the Earth, Gaia, and Selene, the moon, but some of these familiar planets. Saturn carries the Greek name Kronos. Saturn is the Roman name for Kronos. Jupiter is the Roman name for Zeus. Aphrodite is the Greek name. Venus is the Roman name. Mars is the Roman name for the Greek god Ares. And then this also goes for some of these other planets. Hermes is the Greek name. The Roman name is Mercury. The outer planets, not part of the Greek geocentric world system. Again, some Greek systems were heliocentric or focused around a central fire, but many were geocentric. Still, Uranos was conceived as the starry sky and is the name of the planet Uranus today. Poseidon in Greek is Neptune in Latin, hence the name of the planet, and there's Pluto, Hades. Likewise in the weekdays that are conventional. Sunday is named for the sun, of course, and that is Helios, the Titan. So in that sense, the week starts with the sun. The moon for Monday. Tuesday coming through Norse mythology. Tyr's Day is Ares' Day, is Mars' Day. Wednesday is Odin's Day, which is Mercury's Day, which is Hermes' Day. Thursday is Thor's Day. Thor's Day, haha. Jupiter's Day, Zeus's Day. Friday is Freya's Day, which is Venus's Day, which is Aphrodite's Day. Saturday is Saturn's Day, which is Kronos' Day, which is a day of rest, partly because after Kronos was overthrown by Zeus, on some versions of the myth, though he spent time down in Tartarus, he came back and rules over the Isles of the Blessed, where everything is blissful, ideal, restful, like the Golden Age. Saturday is a good day to celebrate that. Now, another way of looking at the reception of these sort of divine principles, we've thought of a lot of the different theories of myth. So again, you can think about how you might apply those. And this too is a way of kind of finding logos in the mythos, of doing philosophy in a way. I mean, you can think about how you would apply a feminist critique to some of those stories of the Olympian order and their provinces, how you would consider what they disclose about power structures and identity, and how you might retell them. What kinds of figures you might center in those stories, or what might seem especially significant to you in them. Or you can think about them psychologically. Take that Jungian approach. What deep archetypal human principles that go beyond representation do they single out for you? And how would you tell that story? What kind of story would you represent? And so on. You get the idea. This has moved a lot of poets, even in the last 100 years. So one is Rilke. Now it would be time, originally German English translation, now it would be time that gods should step out from inhabited things, and that they should knock down every wall in my house, new sides. Only the wind which such a leaf would throw in turning would suffice to shovel the air over like sod, a new breath field. O gods, gods, you often comers, sleepers in things, who arise brightly, who at the spring we conjecture wash face and neck, and who lightly add their being repose to that which seems full, our full life. Once more let it be your morning, gods. We repeat, you alone are origin. The world gets up with you, and beginning glistens on all the breaking places of our failure. So that's one way that these literary figures of the gods, these symbols of ancient Greece, thousands of years later, continue to move and influence a poetic sense of the freshness that for some they still inspire. There's also an important connection when we talk of these Greek gods, as we mentioned in some of our first discussions. There's a sort of resonance with contemporary Greek identity that comes out in some beautiful 20th century Greek poetry. This poet, for example, Seferis, is talking about a statue of the god now long ago. So often we could say appropriated by all this. Here we are talking about it in an academic context. Lots of other European scholars in the 19th, 20th century who in a way took control of the narrative of the Greek gods. But what if that's part of a heritage that one is trying to relearn, to bring to life, to tell orally? I look at the eyes, he writes, or if we use the language we borrowed of Hesiod, he sings. Neither open nor closed, I speak to the mouth which keeps trying to speak. I hold the cheeks which have broken through the skin. That's all I'm able to do. And a soul, if it is to know itself, must look into its own soul. That becomes an important theme with Plato too, self-knowledge. And as we saw with the oracle at Delphi, know thyself, know theseauton. And what do we see? The stranger and the enemy. We've seen him in the mirror. So Rilke and Safaris are some examples of how the symbolism of this way of understanding the cosmos around us and its structure continues to move us in a literary way. We saw a little bit earlier some artistic and visual examples as well, and maybe we'll give Rilke the last word. What I grasp most fully of the life of the gods, which ever renews and replays itself in the spiritual, and does so rightfully, is the moment when they withdraw themselves. What would a god be without the cloud that protects him? What would an outworn god be? If you were thinking of this in a Jungian way, it's a little bit about archetypes, though this is a different take. An archetype, for Jung at least, is supposed to be thriving and brimming over with energy, capacity to move us. What would it be if an archetype no longer shone or moved like that? What would an outworn god be? This idea of the mist or the cloud that protects the god is deeply grounded in Greek literature, but as we'll see, it's also part of the origins of science in ancient Greece. The idea that there's a difference between the reality that the gods represent and the appearance as we ordinarily access it. So as we come to discuss more the sources and origins of Greek philosophy, we'll see that the notion that the gods are hidden from us is important in the philosopher's fundamental and irrepressible curiosity about the nature of things. So in this discussion, we've explored the powers and provinces of some of the Olympian gods, some of the ways the philosophers have interpreted them, especially in ancient Greece, and some of the reception and influence they've had, just scratching the surface. And I'd also encourage you to go back, if you haven't had a chance already, to look at the discussion of theories of myth, to see some other examples of that reception and influence, creative retellings of the story.
No